That when we obey, when we obey God and we come to him and ask him for help, he's there. He's with us. He responds. Now this morning, we are in Habakkuk. And I want to talk to you guys about just a simple thought. And this thought is this. It's a simple thought, but it's a profound thought in how Habakkuk faced it. But the title of this morning is, I've got a question. How many of you guys have ever had a question for God? Yep. How many of you guys in your parenthood life, or as a child one time, you ever been in that experience where you're standing next to your mom or your dad and you're just like, Dad, right? And then if dad doesn't answer, Mom. Usually what happens is I'm really attuned to that kind of stuff. Kelly has really worked out this like supernatural ability to just like tune it out. So one of the kids will be like, Mom, Mama, Mommy, Mom. And I'm like, don't you hear them calling your name? Oh, what? Oh, never mind. We feel like that sometimes with God. We're like, God, are you listening? God, what's going on? God, what's happening? God, can you make sense of this? God, can you help me understand this? God, I'm confused. God, I've got a question. And real briefly, for time's sake, I'm just going to shoot right into the message here. Giving you guys just a little bit of history, reminding you back to what is going on. King Josiah, that awesome king who took the reign at 8 years old, led the people of God in this great revival. Awesome things were happening, and then Josiah died, and his predecessors took the throne, and things spiraled out of control. Now, this is a good book, and it explains who God is, and it defines who God is. It's a history book. And so, when we read this book, we have to understand that these are actual historical accounts. These are stories not, fabricated and compiled in this book to make us feel better, though they at times definitely encourage us. This is a book of history, and this is the history of Israel. This is the history of God's chosen. And what happens is Habakkuk faces this difficult moment. He cries out to God because there's injustice everywhere. The people that were in his time were making terrible choices, doing stupid things, giving themselves completely into sin. And Habakkuk says, why? What is going on? What are you doing? God, why aren't you responding? And that's where we were last week. And in the second part of Habakkuk 1, he starts to ask some questions. He starts to dialogue with God. I love this book of the Bible because, like I was sharing last week, we got the minor prophets and the major, prophets, and it's just the size of the book. But Habakkuk is a little bit of a different book because it doesn't record necessarily a message to people that God was speaking through a prophet. It actually records a dialogue that's happening between a prophet and God himself. They're having a conversation. And Habakkuk begins to outline his dilemma. He begins to talk about his problem. Now, if you were to look at the original language and understand meanings of names, in this time, names really had a significant meaning. They were important. And so Habakkuk's name literally meant to embrace or to wrestle. It reaches out to embrace God and to hold on to God when life is making no sense. And he wrestles with God, and he tries to understand. Another outline of the 3 chapters could be found this way: faith tested, faith taught, and faith triumphant. And so here we are, jumping right back into it. All this stuff is going on, and we see the dialogue of a frustrated prophet, a person who's talking to God, saying, okay, I've got a question. Now, a lot of us, looking at the injustices of the world around us, can feel like we could create a lot of questions for God in that. But when it gets more personal, When you feel like the injustice happened to you, when you feel like something very personal, very deep, very painful, very uncomfortable happens to you, you begin to question, you begin to wonder, you begin to ask God, what is going on? What is happening? God, I've got a question. I've got a question. And we read some of this last week, but Habakkuk chapter 1, starting with verse 12, it says, Lord, are you not from everlasting, my God, my Holy One? You will never die. O Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Now, the thing that's confusing to Habakkuk is that when he cried out to God and said, God, I need you to intervene. There's some injustice going on. And God responds with saying that he's going to allow a warring nation to come and plunder them. It's just like, there's some things that we just come up against in the Bible, and I understand. It's okay to say, I just don't get it sometimes, but he's going to allow them to face the wrath of their poor choices. You know, there are times when it's definitive that God is in action. We definitely feel, as the Bible might define as chastisement or punishment. A good parent punishes their child, not because they're aggravated or angry with them or frustrated or just want to give it to them. A good parent punishes their child because they know that they are doing their best to help them lead a life that would be better than what they're already doing. They want to see them get better. They want to see their children live a healthy existence. They want to see good in their life. So they punish them to bring them back to reality, so to speak. And God's allowing something very hard to happen. And in this first verse, you can see a question begin to manifest itself. Habakkuk is saying, God, who are you? Who are you? He's asking that question. Now, if you look at that question, how do we even begin to unpack that? God, the creator of the universe, the one with all the special ability to create humanity as he did, to create us individually with specific fingerprints, to create us individually with hair or no hair, to create us individually with stature and size and everything. God, in his greatest display of how marvelous he is, created all of this, and we're trying to look at the creative one, the one who holds it all together, the God of the universe, and we see Habakkuk begin to ask questions that we ask. God, who are you? Who are you? Now, he begins to call out some very specific, definitive terms. Habakkuk begins to say in the text here, he's everlasting, he's Lord, he's God, he's holy, he's a rock. Just to unpack that for a minute, everlasting means that God is sovereign, and that means that God is in control of all things. Now, if God were not sovereign and we didn't have confidence and faith in that, we would never be able to trust his wisdom. I know, because some of us question his wisdom at times. If we're honest, when we see something happen, we're like, really? What are you doing, God? Lord we have to understand that is a personal term for Israel. That's something that speaks of a loyal and perfect love that he has for us. God speaks of his majesty, that he's a powerful God, that he's mighty, that he's awesome, and holy speaks of his perfection, that he's not been tainted by evil, that he's not corrupted. And we couldn't trust God if he was corrupted. We couldn't place our confidence in God if he wasn't absolutely perfect, because we are imperfect. We are messed up. And God is not messed up. And so when we find ourselves in the middle of our dilemmas, we go to God and he gives us direction. He gives us understanding. And in that, he's perfect. He is just. He is fair. And when he calls him rock, he's speaking of his protection. And if we ever doubt his protection or the fact that he is the rock, we will ever question his goodness. The question might when it all, begins to whittle down to this, the question is not, do you believe in God, but rather, what sort of God do you believe in? I mean, like, you can have conversations, and a lot of conversations are easily started with people like, do you believe in God? Well, yeah, I believe in God. And that's just kind of a broad statement. I mean, a lot of people just believe in God. They believe in this ethereal thing that God is this big guy with a huge, long, amazing white beard, just kind of like wisdom, just like being projected out and just kind of ruling things and moving slowly. And we have this perspective. We all believe at times, yeah, there's a God of the universe. Yeah, there's a God out there. But the deeper question, the getting to the root of it, trying to understand better, we begin to ask ourselves, okay, I believe in God, but what sort of God do I believe in? Who is he? And Habakkuk is facing this dilemma. God, who are you? Who are you? And any one of us, when facing difficult challenges in our life, from time to time, will go to our moment and say, God, who are you? Who are you? Now, just some of the things that come to mind immediately when I think of this detail about who God is, I go back to some of the most basic but profound statements about God. And God is Father. And this is foundational, church. This is important. This is critical. This is a foundational thing. God is Father, not as you would understand Father in the culture and world around us, but Father as perfect, Father as flawless, Father as loving. God is happy. This is important. This is so important. Because for some of us, God is this nasty man up there waiting with a bat or a lightning bolt or whatever you want to call it, waiting for every moment that we slip up to say, gotcha, whack, idiot. God is happy. God delights in his creation. God is in love with what he's created. And that's the next one, is God is love. Every action, even wrath, is born of this reality. I know, you're like, wrath, when we think of God of wrath, we think of natural disasters, we think of these massive things that happen in the Old Testament, we think of the Egyptians chasing after God's chosen, trying to get across the Red Sea and watching as the Red Sea caves in and decimates all the enemies. We're like, how is that born of love? It's so complicated, yet at times we make it more complicated than it needs to be. And so Habakkuk begins to question, he begins to ask this question like, God, who are you? God, who are you? And I've faced those moments in my own life before. I've faced challenges and difficulties where I've questioned who God is and where he is and what he's doing and things that I just can't wrap my mind around. For instance, just giving you guys an example, a lot of you guys know this, but it's been 16 years since I lost my dad. And that's one of those questions that still I don't have an answer for. Things okay, God, my dad knew who you were, Father, but he chose addiction as opposed to serving you. Even to the details of the day that my father was killed in his accident, nobody knows what happened. The only thing we do know is that he was going to meet somebody at a bar, and in his own words, he was going to get some good stuff. But that's all we know. Because of the nature of his habits, because of the nature of what he did and who he was, because of the nature of his addictions, the coroner didn't see fit or need to do any kind of autopsy. We just know that he went somewhere, he got in a vehicle, and he was in an accident. And we know that the accident was like, it wasn't like something that could have happened by accident. I mean, it was the way that the accident happened, there had to have been something wrong. And those are one of those questions, like even 16 years later, when people have said, okay, Seth, he's been gone for 16 years, move on. You still wonder, okay, God, I know that you love, and I know that you're Father, and I know that you delight in what you've created, but some things I just don't understand. And so Habakkuk begins to ask that question, who are you? And the next question is in verse 13, your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up more righteous than themselves? If you could whittle it down, he might be asking something more like, how can you do this? How can you do this? How can you allow this to happen? How can you, God? How can you? And at any point in our lives, at some point or another, wherever we are when it comes to our relationship with God, we are all going to arrive at that point at some place or another where we say, okay, God, and I'm trying to understand who you are now. How can you do this? God, how can you do this? And sometimes we get afraid because we think that we're asking God questions that's going to make us look like the ultimate blasphemer or something like that. But God is big enough to handle our biggest wonders and worries and anxieties. Every thoughtful person at one point or another will wrestle with God. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, though we read it a lot. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your path straight. Not your own understanding. Just a quick encouragement. Focus on him. When you wonder this, when you ask this, when you have this question like, God, how can you do this? How is this happening? Why is this happening? God, why didn't you intervene and keep me from this guy or this girl? God, I don't want to deal with another cancer scare. God, I'm confused. My family feels like it's falling apart. How can you do this? God, I love that person so much and they're gone. How can you do this? How can you do this? Just some side notes. These are free. But usually when we face this moment, sometimes we just need to be quiet and listen. Allow God to speak. We need to find our peace, which is God himself. And we need to allow God to move. Give him some space. Instead of getting, in there and saying, God, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Just back up for a minute and allow him to do whatever he's doing. God is this incredible, limitless creator, and we can't even begin to fathom what he's orchestrating behind the scenes, things that we don't even know that are going on. The next one is in verse 17. He says, is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? This is speaking of the enemy nation, and the net speaking of him just throwing out the net and grabbing people and grabbing what they have and destroying people after people. And the question is whittled down to this: how long? How long will this last? How long will it last? How long is this going to go on for? God, how long is this going to take? I mean, ordinarily I'm a patient person, right? But God, I don't understand. I mean, I feel like something horrible is happening here. Now you're telling me it's going to take place. But God, I just don't understand. How long is this going to take? How long is this going to take? And it can feel maddeningly hard to get. When God says that his ways are not our ways, he really means it. We can be overwhelmed and find ourselves like, okay, God, I'm understanding your nature a little bit more. I'm understanding who you are a little bit more. I understand that what you do is all born out of your love that is endless and limitless. And God, I'm understanding who you are a little bit better. And God, okay, I'm grappling with the doubt of allowing you to do what you want to do. And okay, I don't understand it, but you've got a plan and all this. Okay, we established that. Okay, God, how long is this going to take? I mean, we're like 3 minutes from our house, and my son's like, Dad, how long till Littleton? And then 40 seconds later, are we there yet? Okay, you guys have faced that before, haven't you? You're like, how many times have we made this drive, son? I mean, probably the scenery by now, And sometimes we can find ourselves in this maddening place where we're just like, okay, God, I don't like the wait. We did a series several years ago called The Waiting Room. We don't like that place. We don't like it. It's not comfortable. It's not easy. God is working something out. He's like, okay, you are here and you need to be here, but you're stuck right here at the moment. And there's a reason for that. I'm working on you. I'm doing some things. I'm pulling some things together. I'm making some things happen. I'm putting it all in its place. And so we find ourselves in those moments where we question God, where we ask God why. In chapter 2, verse 1, finishing out the thought here. I mean, I only touched on 3 questions, but we know that the questions could be so many more. We've got God, who are you? God, how can you do this? And how long, God, is this going to last? I mean, and those kind of capture a lot of our thoughts, but many of us have many, 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 many more questions. And we begin to ask God, what is going on? What is happening? What's taking place? I just don't get it. I just don't understand it. I'm so confused. And Habakkuk's word shed some light for us. He made a decision. In verse 1, he says, I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. God, here it is. God, here are my questions. God, here's what I'm feeling. Okay, God, that's it. I got a question. Okay. So you blurt it out, and it's crickets. And you're like, where are you at, Lord? Habakkuk probably was feeling a little bit of silence from God. And sometimes we can feel that way. But Habakkuk makes a decision. He makes this it's like this tower that he made, and he's going to go and stand on it, and he's going to wait. A watchtower, a guard post, really is what it was. It describes some sort of wooden tower that the prophet had built. And there alone, he would watch and wait for God's answer to come. He would watch and wait for God to speak. He would watch and wait for God's voice. He would watch and wait as God would prepare the answer for him. J. Sidlow Baxter said this: people say that God does not speak to men as he did long ago, but the truer statement is that men do not listen today as they did long ago. And so he builds this watchtower, and he's like, okay, I got some questions. I'm waiting for an answer. I'm going to stand in this watchtower, and I'm going to let you come to me when the time is right. And so here we are. We have doubts. And doubts are scary. Doubts are frightful because we're like, man, I have these doubts and I have these insecurities. God, I don't understand you right now. God, I don't understand why you're allowing this right now. God, I don't know how long it's going to take to get through this. God, I'm so confused. And we're so afraid to voice our doubts that our doubts are going to ultimately alienate us from God. I want to tell you guys something on the contrary this morning. Yeah, doubts are not always good. Doubts can either, in some instances, doubts can actually, it really causes two things. It either drive you into the arms of God or propel you away from God, depending on how you respond to those doubts. You either run towards God, run towards his mercy, run towards his love, run towards his graciousness, or you will walk away from him. Either or. And here's the truth. We should allow our doubts and insecurities to be a positive thing that drives us closer to the Creator. And we should understand that all the things that are going on in our mind, all the doubts, all the insecurities, all the fears, all the trepidation, all the things that we're thinking, all the things that are coming through our mind, God is better. God is better. You see, doubt tears down the castle walls to force us on a journey. It may feel like God is far away or absent when the fact is a gift that God wants to move and make us more spiritually mature. It's tough. It's tough. But Habakkuk made a decision. He's like, hey, I'm going to get in my watchtower, I'm going to stand here, and I'm going to wait, okay? I don't see him yet, but I'm just going to be patient. I don't see what's going on yet, but I'm just going to be patient. I'm just going to wait. And that can be so very hard. But we can be hopeful this morning because God is better. Doubt tears down the castle walls and forces us into a journey to pursue him, to chase after him, to love him more, to fight for him. Doubting God is painful and frightening because we think we are leaving God behind. But if we approach it right, we're leaving behind the idea of God we like to surround ourselves with, the small God, the God we control, and the God who agrees with us. And doubt forces us to look at who we think God is. Embrace that doubt. Call it your friend. God is leading you on a journey of deeper intimacy with him. When he doesn't do what you think he should have done, don't let it chase you away. Let it cause you to chase him with greater fervor and greater passion and greater diligence. You see, God's ways are better. God's heart is better. God's thoughts are better. God's plan is better. God doesn't have deadlines, and he never hurries. But that's okay. I'm going to finish with this scripture. Isaiah 40:31 says this. They who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. I know, church. I know. We're looking at all this around us. We're looking at the dilemma that our family's in. We're looking at the fact that I'm dancing that Pastor Said was released. I don't know if you guys heard that, but he was released from captivity. He's coming home. He was a pastor that was captured and thrown in prison. And they released him, but there are others that are being martyred, that are being killed, that are being thrown in jail. There are people that are pronouncing their faith in God boldly, and they're being locked up for it. There are others that are struggling and that are overwhelmed, that are in difficult places, and we can be so confused. But I want to challenge you today to keep on, to stay focused, to be intentional about pursuing him. Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. Don't be afraid of the wait. Don't be afraid of the doubt. Don't be afraid of the questions. Don't be intimidated by those things. Allow those things to thrust you into his arms. Allow those things to cause you to search after him with deeper passion and vigor. And so my question to you in this, the last part of this, when we all whittle it down, I've got a question. When we ask God all the questions, what do we do then? I want to challenge you guys and encourage you guys to not be afraid of being in the watchtower for a little while. He's coming. The answer's coming. Things are going to get there. God is working it out. God is doing what God is doing. And I would just encourage you guys to be okay with that. To be okay with that. The Bible very clearly says that his ways are not our ways, that his ways are higher than ours. So newsflash, you're not going to get it all the time. In fact, we probably won't get it most of the time. And just because you don't understand doesn't mean that you can't trust. Your child, if they trust you, you say, come. They don't know where you're going. They don't know where you're leading. They don't know where you're telling them to go. And they grab your hand and they just follow. Sometimes we just got to do that. I was delighted when my wife began to just lay in for a minute, that these altars were filled with kids. That meant something to me. That meant something to me. And I think that says something to us. That we've got to allow ourselves to be comfortable with a childlike faith that just believes, even when we don't understand everything. Even when we don't get it. Even when it just feels confusing. Don't be afraid to ask him the questions, but once you've asked the questions, once you've released your feelings, once you share with him what the doubt is, just wait. 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 Waiting on God is good for the soul, especially if you're waiting on the Lord. As you wait, remember that God has not forgotten you. You are on his mind right now. He sees you in your confusion. He sees you in your fear. He sees your weariness and your distress. But don't evacuate and say, okay, God, I'm done with you. I don't get it. Habakkuk, we're tracing the story and the story continues. We'll talk about faith next week. But Habakkuk, if he would have walked away, he wouldn't have been able to experience the fullness of God's promise in his life. He wouldn't have been able to experience everything that God had for him. God, in your goodness, we thank you so much for this morning. We thank you for the truth of your word. We thank you for the support and strength this morning to continue on, God, to be bold and brave enough to follow your lead. God, even when we don't understand that we can ask questions, that we can be inquisitive, God, that we can seek after you for details about what you're doing. But even when we don't get it, God, help us to boldly hold on and trust that we would stand up just like Habakkuk did and stand up in the rampart, stand up in the watchtower and just wait for you. Allow you to have your way. Allow you to do what you have planned, and that in our waiting that our strength would be renewed, that we would soar high in the sky, and that our run would not be faint or weary, but that we would be able to have the strength to push on and push through. God, help us in this moment as we trust you, though our faith be shaken. It's in your wonderful name we pray. Amen.